Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, Senior Science Fellow and Atmospheric Scientist at Nutrient Ag Solutions, and I'm going to thank Illinois Farm Credit for giving me a chance to talk to you today about weather. We've had a lot change since many of us met back in the winter time frame during the winter meetings, and we need to talk about it and see what it might mean for summer. And this first map has got the biggest kind of component to that. This is precipitation ranks compared to historical numbers going back to 1893 for every climate reporting district in the United States. And we nailed this. We had this right. This was well forecast. The wetter conditions in the southeast, the wetter conditions that were in the northwest, but this was missed. That was something that I thought we would continue to see dry conditions building in spring, and it just did not happen. I'm going to explain to you why so that we can learn something from this, but it's important for our summer forecast, and here's why. Every single major drought episode in Illinois, in the Corn Belt, has begun with major drought problems here. And the reason for that is later in the season, when we're trying to draw moisture from the Gulf, if this area is dry, it will steal the moisture first. So when we start to think about some of the numbers we put out there early in the year, back in January, February, and March, of having drought risk of about 60%, those numbers have changed, and we need to make sure we understand that. Now, when you look at this map, it's pretty clear. Parts of Nebraska, actually really starting in Colorado, clipping parts of Kansas, northern Missouri, the northern half of Illinois, kind of I-72 north, clipping parts of Indiana, southern Wisconsin, back around to Iowa. That's been an area that has been drier. Same thing with the Northwest. And we just have questions as to whether or not as we progress into summer, if this precipitation disparity, the range you see on this is going to continue. And is the pattern going to flip-flop? What kind of problems are there possibly going to be? But reality is, since we started this spring time frame, total drought area in the United States has shrunk by 20%. And while anticipated in some areas, not well anticipated in others. So I've been calling this whole area the Gulf of the Mid-South. And the reason I'm calling it that is because we're getting enhancement in the moisture as it comes from the real Gulf over this area. We need to see what that's going to mean going forward. So here we go. Right now, soil moisture problems are still an issue in the northern half of Illinois, not in the southern half. In fact, in the southern half, the frequency of rainfall events have been so problematic for getting a crop established early that many folks found themselves 2, 3, 4 weeks behind the normal planting progress. But if you look in the northern part of Illinois, northern Indiana, northern Missouri as well, there is still some of fall's drought lingering in our deep soil moisture profile. And that percentile or that rank is still down there in the bottom 2 to 10%. We cannot, skip that. We have to consider what that means. And here's one of the reasons that I think we saw such an interesting pattern. Now, I was worried about drought because I thought the jet stream was going to do this, going to stay to the south of the Gulf of Alaska, roll way up into Canada like this, and then dive into the North Atlantic and plant a big ridge right there. And guess what? It did. What I missed back in spring was that under this pattern, several in mid to late April through the month of May, several weak but expansive cutoff low pressure systems are going to move slowly across the country. They are the reason why we've seen such a windy mid to late spring. They are the reason we've had so much cloud cover. They're the reason we've had all of this excessive rain south and drier conditions to the north. But in the north, we've had cooler weather as well. I mean, that's the temperature ranks from the end of May, the last 2 weeks of May, essentially. And some parts of Illinois are off on their accumulation of GDDs. In other words, this crop isn't exploding out of the ground. Now, it's hot today as I'm recording all of this here on June the 3rd. But my point is just to tell you that what an odd mid to late spring time period that was not well forecasted. And by the way, that big ridge I showed you, this one up here, it's been responsible for all that wildfire smoke. I pulled up just a map from June 2nd so you could see how that smoke was continuing to get pulled, all the way down here to the Gulf Coast and over to the East Coast. It was much worse if you go back to last weekend. And those fires started almost around Memorial Day weekend. So this is where we are. And if you looked yesterday on June 2nd, look at all the storm activity that was to our west. We're actually going to continue to watch that move toward us and bring in some more rain to Illinois. The whole state, I think, is going to get a decent shot at getting some rain because right now we have flood watches that extend from the Red River of the south all the way over to the Missouri River. And to the north of that, these are all air quality issues. So here it is. This is your next 7 days across the whole country, and we're hitting that same area again with incredibly heavy rainfall. But zooming in here kind of in the Midwestern United States, we are expecting, look at the north-south differences here. Better chances for 2 inches south, all right, maybe west, but lower chances for having that kind of heavier rainfall to north. But overall, In the next 7 days, most model forecasts are calling for a good chance of at least an inch. What's that? I mean, 50% or better chance of at least an inch. Now, we have to make sure we take that with a grain of salt, because what has this spring taught us? It's taught us that the precipitation patterns have been highly variable. So let's take a look at it. Let's get into this near-term forecast because it's important. And this is what's been going on. Since June 2nd into June 3rd, we have a large system that's to our west, and it's pressing toward us. And we are expecting that those rain showers and thunderstorms to move across Iowa and Missouri as we get into the rest of the day on Tuesday the 3rd. They're going to spread through parts of Illinois. Big squall line might enter parts of Missouri and kind of Iowa, Illinois by tonight on Tuesday night, June 3rd. And it's going to try to get over the top of the rest of Illinois. But look at how things start to break up. Did you notice that? Look at that big squall line there tonight. And then the overnight hours getting into Wednesday morning, it falls apart. I'm going to have to watch that one carefully. And Wednesday, the front lingers and possibly brings in better chances of rain. Where? To the north versus the south initially. But then the south is expected to get in on some of this as we work our way through the early morning hours on Thursday. I'm talking about south of 72, if that's just a good interstate to divide Illinois by. But overall, when you look at just the next 10 days, as I said, much of the central United States is wet. Much of the Corn Belt is wet. That's the probability of grabbing an inch of rain over the next 10 days. In fact, if you look at 2 inches, we've got very high probabilities in through this area of having at least 2 inches, which means it is not dry. We're going to keep watering this crop. So you might be asking, well, Eric, you had kind of told us 60% chance of drought. And we remember as we went through that meant 40% chance that the ingredients were not going to come together to make this happen. An early season moisture, I'm just going to go back to it again. This has dramatically changed the odds of widespread Corn Belt drought. And now what we're going to get into a discussion about is much more focused precipitation disparity. Is it going to hit certain acres, or is it going to hit the acres for you all? Now, real quick, over the next 5 days, this is what our precipitation looks like compared to average. So this gets us out there to June 8th. As we then look out there, let's go to this map right here. That would be June 7th through June 13th. That's a day 4 through 10. So we do have a drier stretch coming through, but we'll look at the temperatures and what they're going to do during that time in a few moments. But overall, as I look at where this pattern is going, I'm curious as to what's going to happen to the big subtropical high pressure systems that flank North America. So remember, we talk in our meetings about the Bermuda high or the Pacific high. And what I'm noticing is as we get out there toward the middle of the month, here's June 10th, 11th, and 12th. The 13th, which by the way, we have a Friday the 13th coming up in June. Getting into the 14th, 15th, and 16th, I see the Pacific high moving here. There's some general, what we call trophiness. In other words, the jet stream dips to the south there, and a broader ridge beginning to open itself up into this area. Now, we would expect ridges like that in June. It's the question as to whether or not it's transient, meaning it's going to keep moving and we're going to flip the pattern back over, or is it something a bit more permanent? Now, thinking it through, the day 8 through 14 precipitation pattern currently being forecast by all of our major models, including the European, is actually on the drier side of average. But to be honest with you, some heat, which we are going to see coming back in, and some dryness is not a bad thing in June as long as it returns in July. And let's get into that and just talk about it as we work toward the end of this video. So let's take a look at temperatures, right? Today's a hot one. There's the front, though, that's making all that precip you just saw me animate for you. So yeah, Champaign, 89 today. Very warm in the south. Now watch. By tomorrow, the front clears. We drop off 10 degrees. This is now getting out to Thursday, still near normal high temperatures. The west begins to bake as we get into the weekend. That's Saturday, June 7th, Sunday, June 8th, and we're looking at near normal temperatures. But the good thing about this is we're accumulating GDDs. I have over the next 15 days a very high probability of grabbing another 250 to maybe 300 GDDs for most of Illinois Farm Credit's territory here, which is good. We need to get some heat on this crop. But take a look at that. It's still not hot, right? When does the real warmth start to come back in? So that's your next 5 days, okay? And I'm going to slide this out to show you day 5 through 10. Notice we haven't broken away and just gotten hot while the west does. But as we approach the middle of the month, we're really starting to see some warmer than average temperatures build back in. And we got big questions. Is this the beginning of a kind of a new regime in the flow of the atmosphere? We know that we've taken some of our drought risk off the table, but there is still this problem of flash drought. And many of you listening to me have memories of pattern flip-flops. I mean, we have them from the past couple of years, right? Do you remember spring, of 23, bone dry, lots of wildfire smoke. Summer came through and it stormed like mad. Then in 2024, right, very wet upper Midwest, record dry fall in the Mississippi Basin. So we're all concerned about what that might look like going forward. And I just want to show you this. When we look for those clues, sometimes the ocean temperatures tell us what's going on. And I'm going to look at a couple of side-by-side maps here. Over here, I have the last 7 days of change, and over here, I have the current ocean temperature pattern. And we've got one strike against us, and that's right here. Cold water in this area still keeps summer drought risk, flash drought risk, higher in the Midwest. But if this area went over cold as well, that would be an additive feature to make us even greater at risk. And right now, that area is not going over cold. I mean, take a look. Over the last 7 days, it's actually warmed up in that area. So you need to watch it. We're not yet to the point where that's going to be a significant story, but is it being, has it been showing us the tendency of getting colder? And part of that answer is yes, but it's not a slam dunk. Now, let me tell you what I mean. I've been watching the decay of a La Nina, but I'm going to be honest, it's not fully decayed just yet. We're still getting Nina-like behavior in the ocean. You're saying, what does that even mean? Well, going back to May 3rd and then forecasting out to June 17th, this is looking at right there, the international date line. Do you see these blues, these cool colors? Those indicate where there are stronger trade winds, and that is what a La Nina is. If this was all red, we'd be talking about El Nino. And it's not temperature, it's trade winds. Look at this. Going forward, I continue to see over the next 15 days more trade wind activity. And it's starting to move around another feature we watch a lot, which is called the MJO. Now, this is what's interesting. The MJO just made a huge jump out into phase 5 through 6 and 7. It's going to go and then collapse again. Now, we don't need to go back and look at history and say, well, what does that mean and how does that? What it means is this big transition of the MJO means that the second half of June, it is very unlikely that it looks like the front half of June. And you're saying, well, wait, what's the front half of June look like? It looks like this. That's out to June 10th. And so we're starting to get some indications from some of our longer range models, like this one from the Climate Prediction Center, that as we work out there June 14th through 27th, we push a lot of that moisture into the southeast. And we start to talk about the risk of some drier and hotter conditions building in. It is a real probability, a realistic solution, if you will, as to what's going on. And you want to know what's really interesting is the Climate Prediction Center still thinks that there is going to be drought in the Western Corn Belt developing this summer. See that color, drought development? They just released this on May 31st. And they've got evidence to support that. I have evidence to support that too. The real issue, though, is that it's so wet down here that the likelihood of this being expansive, massively yield-robbing drought, that's been reduced. It's just not there. In other words, don't talk about 12 and 88 or 83 or 80 or 70. No. You got to take those years out. But there will be highly focused regional drought problems this summer. And we need to think about what that might mean going forward. So here's what I need you to watch with me as we start to wrap this up. I went back and looked at some really hot and dry Julys and Augusts, right? And this is the main story. The Bermuda high, which normally sits right here, shifts. So if you'd like to know what you should be watching in my forecasts, is if the Bermuda high goes off to Iceland or Ireland. Because in its wake, it will leave an area of high pressure there, and troughs will dip into the west. And the pattern will get really long and wavy and north. And long waves like these retrograde. They actually move west rather than east. And so what we're going to be watching for is something like that to happen. Now, what that ends up doing at the surface is it puts the Pacific high here. It gives us a big ridge over Minnesota and Wisconsin there, and the Bermuda high is here. So that was an upper level height pattern I showed you a moment ago. There's the surface pattern. And guess what this does? It just closes off the Gulf. Now, if it closes that off, we tend to get regional flash drought development while the west is cool. Now, what are the likelihoods of something like this happening? I've now reduced this to 40%. 40%. That means 4 in 10, based off of what I know now. There's a 4 in 10 chance of that happening. Now, don't make that binary. Don't go, well, 40% is below 50, therefore this is a no. That's not there. There's still some significant risk of this, and we can see that in some of our forecasts. Now, I'm only going to show you the Climate Prediction Center, but I'm just going to let you know the ECMWF and the National Multi-Model Ensemble, they look something similar to this. So take note, for June, July, and August, the model's attempting to go drier west of the Mississippi all the way here through the Missouri Basin. It's also got July, August, and September very dry for this part of the western side of the Mississippi Basin. Now, what do you do with this? You have to understand that nothing is coming together today, this moment, that is screaming that this is going to happen. It's just kind of a factor when you look at all of the historical analogs, you look at all of the behavioral pattern of the water temperatures and what the atmosphere is doing, that it could happen. I'm going to give you the secret sauce, though. What I watch most carefully, GSDM, here's one of my favorite websites, okay? What I'm going to watch most carefully is this. These time periods, let me tell you what I'm highlighting here for you. These time periods of these blue-green temperatures, okay? Not temperatures, blue-green colors. They represent where the atmosphere loses momentum. And it did in April and May. But why was it so wet if it lost momentum? Because of those dumb cutoff lows. Sorry, they were tricky to forecast. They are hard to predict. Now look, if this particular pattern shows up again the second half of June, which is off the page, and the momentum of the atmosphere just dives back down again, then that Western Corn Belt risk comes right back onto our discussion. So what do you do with this information? Do you change your strategy? No, don't. But you now know what I'm watching and what could possibly take shape in order to put some sort of weather premium in the model. What would make me wrong? What would make me wrong is if those ocean temperatures, let's just go look at them. The ocean temperatures, here it is, let this load for you, do not cool off here. And they stay like they are here. And then we get into an active hurricane season. So, with all of that being said, these next 3 to 4 weeks are going to be critical to pay attention to this region, and if ridging forms here because the Bermuda high leaves and the Pacific high leaves, that's going to be front of mind going forward. All right, I know that was a little bit longer video, but hey, there's a lot to discuss, and I want to thank Farm Credit for giving me an opportunity to talk to you. So we'll chat again soon. Thanks.